And you're on.
Great. Hey, late night from Willowdale. We haven't done a video in many months. And I think the last video I did, we were kind of drunk at a pub up Yonge and Sheppard, right? The Firkin. We were talking, that was before.
No, wasn't it in the park?
No, I think it was at the pub at
Okay.
Yonge and Sheppard. I think it was back in January or early February, before Putin invaded. You're right, Ukraine. So we haven't done a video or posted anything really on Ukraine because it's such a fast, there's so much information. It was such a fast flowing situation. And there was nothing really profound to say about it. But now we're a number of months in.
60 days, right?
60 days, they say. Yeah, 60 days. And now we're beginning to see where this might end at some point. So let me start off on the outset by saying what I did in that video a number of months ago, a couple of months back, before the invasion, was Vladimir Putin, he had already won, in a sense, that he had, by building up the troops on the border with Ukraine, he had already sort of won. He had gotten the West's attention, NATO's attention, NATO leaders, Macron and others were visiting him, and everyone realized that, it's a good time to maybe re-examine security architecture in Europe and address some of Russia's concerns. Encirclement by NATO, there were some legitimate concerns there, and that could have been addressed through negotiations and stuff. But NATO was never a threat to Russia, and certainly Ukraine wasn't. But re-examining security architecture in Europe was on the table, and negotiations were going on, and Putin was talking to everyone, including the President of the United States, Joe Biden. So he, in a sense, had already won. He should have pulled back his troops, said, okay, I made a point, and now I got their attention. But he did something really stupid. It reminds me of Saddam Hussein when he threatened about Saddam Hussein said, I'm just going to take the border areas of Kuwait and no one will care. And the Americans said, sure, whatever. But when he took the whole country, the world reacted. Saddam Hussein was stupid, and so was Vladimir Putin. He gambled and he lost. Okay, he gambled and he lost. He thought, I'll invade Ukraine, the West really won't care, and the world won't really care, and it'll be an easy and early victory. Well, we all know that's not true. The Ukrainians have put up a really stiff resistance with the help of weapons from NATO countries and elsewhere, and Russia basically has lost this war. And Russia has had thousands of casualties, and of course 1,000 Ukrainians have died, and Russia has had thousands of people die too, soldiers, and they've incurred thousands of casualties. The Russian military in some ways has been decimated, and no one expected the Ukrainians to put up such a resistance, but they did, and it was brilliant, and it continues. It's not over yet, but and a lot of people have died.
In fact, in the Ukraine, they don't know how many people died, right?
It's not known yet. And there definitely war crimes have been committed. In Mariupol and Mariupol and in other places, Bucha outside Kyiv, war crimes have been committed. Civilians have been butchered. And Russia, Russian generals, the Russian military, and Putin and the people around him need to be held accountable. Obviously, Vladimir Putin's a classic case for the International Court, right? For the International Criminal Court. He needs to be brought to The Hague, just like Milosevic was back in the late 90s, early 2000s. But that'll be difficult to do. So yes, war crimes have been committed in Ukraine by the Russian forces, no question. And the people responsible need to be held to account. This will be difficult to do because international relations, this stuff is very difficult.
And the UN isn't that powerful,
And
right?
the UN isn't that powerful. We've seen that. Yeah, they can condemn it and that, but I mean, Russia sits on the Security Council, so yeah, this has shown how feckless some international institutions are. But you know, once you're considered a war criminal by the International Criminal Court or by the International Court of Justice, you're a pariah. You know, I mean, you won't be going to the Academy Awards. You know what I mean?
I totally get that. Yeah.
Yeah. So Putin won't be traveling outside of Russia very much. He's got his, you know, where's he going to go? North Korea, maybe China, but even the Chinese have soured on this, and they're really annoyed that Russia has put them in this position, and they don't really, in some ways, know what to do. As we know, China is totally battling COVID right now. It's a horrible situation. The country's basically in lockdown. One of the world's biggest cities, Shanghai, is in this crazy sort of dystopian lockdown. It's weird. China's battling a lot of things right now. The last thing they needed was to be put on the spot and defend Russia, because China does not want to be cut off from the international economic system. They can't afford it. The trade they do with countries, particularly even the United States, is massive and immense. So,
And they don't really have anything but international economics, right? Like, I mean, they don't, like, China doesn't really have any.
no, China's a trading nation.
Mm-hmm.
They have some resources and stuff, but they're a manufacturing country and a trading nation. They need to trade. Not much different than Canada, really. Canada needs to trade, or the Netherlands, for instance. So they don't want to be cut off from the international system, and Russia put them in an awkward position. And you don't hear a lot from China these days. They got their internal problems with COVID and all sorts of other things, and they haven't given Russia the support that Russia wanted. So that's a very interesting situation. Okay, so I didn't want to make this a long video. So the short of it is that Russia is a very isolated country, and they've become a pariah state, a rogue state. And they were already a failing state before this invasion of Ukraine. But now you don't want to throw that term around very often, failed state, but I would say that Russia is now becoming a failed state. Their economy is in disarray.
Their citizens don't have rights, right?
Their citizens don't have rights. They're repressed, being cut off from all sorts of things. Even chips that they can put into the weapon systems they need from the West, they can't get them. So they're totally cut off. The sanctions, and sanctions, have limited effect. There's been, lots written recently about the effect of sanctions. They've had limited effect on Iran. They've had limited effect on Cuba, and they have limited effect on Russia. But they are having an effect on Russia. I mean, Russia is being squeezed. Now, Russia can still export a lot of oil and gas, but even that is slowly being squeezed out. So Russia's an economy in total disarray, and Russia has become a very isolated country. So if it was a failing state before the invasion, it's now definitely, I would say, a failed state. And its economy is in disarray and in ruin. And when this is all over, Russia's going to find itself in a very difficult position. And as someone said, they're not even really part of the G20 anymore because their economy has shrunk so much. So no point even expelling them. They're not even really eligible for it. So Putin gambled and he lost big time. And this is not over yet. I know Russia wants to consolidate its gains in the east. They want to connect Crimea to the Donbass and Luhansk, and they want to have a continuous sort of Russian entity. We'll see where that goes. This will end in a messy compromise. Okay, war is this will end it. The Ukrainians aren't going to win an outright victory. They already have, in a sense. But this will probably end in a messy compromise, of which I don't know. But it will end. But it could go on for a long time. Putin is not going to give up, and he knows he's already screwed himself in a sense, and he knows he's already lost. But he's going to go down fighting, and a lot more Ukrainians are going to die. And
Isn't he also dealing with like shoddy intelligence? Like I mean, his apparently the people around him are crazier than he is. Like,
yeah, no one wants to speak up to him. No one wants to tell him what he's done was wrong and he's totally screwed up. The Russian military is shown to be ineffectual, which is, extremely valuable if you're evaluating the Russian military. I mean, this invasion of Ukraine has been really valuable to Western intelligence and Western military people, because it shows that the Russian military really was what's the word?
I don't know.
Yeah, you know what I'm talking about,
Yeah,
right? It was ineffectual and
issues with morale and all that stuff.
Yeah, and it's funny when the Americans went into in the early 90s, when the Soviet Union had collapsed, and the Americans went in to check out all the nuclear sites. Apparently a lot of these sites, the missiles had eroded. They were really in bad shape, and they said they couldn't even launch these missiles from the old Soviet Union because they were in such bad shape. And one of Putin's goals was to rebuild the Russian military, and because a lot of Russian soldiers were just poorly paid. Some of them weren't paid. A lot of them didn't have proper clothing. A lot of them didn't even have. They had boots that had holes in them, no socks. It was really horrible. Putin really wanted to build up the military, and he's done it with. Obviously, the Russians have a lot of sophisticated stuff, but obviously we've seen that it's still a kind of a ragtag army with bad military. The operations haven't worked out. Like bad military strategy, and it's shown to be a bit of an embarrassment. And
how many of his generals have died as well?
Generals have died, and there's no operational command, and it's shown to be the military is shown to be been a bit of a joke, and that was surprising to a lot of people. They thought it was
derelict, maybe is the word.
The people thought the military was a lot stronger. So that they'll be looking at this for years to come. Military analysts and scholars will be looking at this one for a long time. So let me move on to, yes, I think there are a lot of people saying it's true. Do we really want to totally isolate Russia when this all ends? Probably not. It's already a pariah state, and the sanctions will remain in place for a long time, and Russia will be an isolated place for a long time. But do we really totally want to isolate them? Probably not a good idea when this all ends. We'll probably have to reach some sort of accommodation. It's hard to deal. I think it'll be very hard to deal with a guy like Putin. He has committed war crimes, and he's a Bond. He's like a villain out of a James Bond movie.
Doesn't his age kind of play into the
whole...
Well,
he's still a young guy. He's in good health. He's in his
69 though?
Yeah.
That's young.
So, I don't know. He's going to be around for a while. So we're going to have to figure this one out. I don't see him meeting with the American president anytime soon. But, you're going to have to figure out... It's going to be a messy compromise to end this war. And we'll see where it all goes. Like I said, even the talk about genocide, throwing that word around, is interesting because there's a lot of hypocrisy. That's the only thing I want to get to is the hypocrisy. Genocide, throwing that around. There's definitely been genocide in other places. Rwanda in the 90s, we ignored it. There's genocide that goes on in the Eastern Congo. Right now, we ignore it. There's nasty human rights abuses going on in Eastern Congo, in Ethiopia over the last year. Horrible atrocities committed by the Ethiopian military against the Tigray. We've ignored it. Yemen was just, the whole war was an atrocity. Thank God there's a bit of a truce going on right now, but who knows? There's lots of nasty stuff going on in the world, and we've ignored it. The war in the Sahel, in that area between the Sahara and West Africa, butchery going on, we've ignored it. So there's a lot of hypocrisy when it comes to, what we pay attention to, what we don't pay attention to. And so there's been a lot, genocide in Myanmar. We don't really seem to care.
The Uyghurs, right? The
Uyghurs, a classic example. We're still trading with China. You know what I mean? So the Uyghurs, I'm glad you brought that up. The Uyghurs are a classic example. So you gotta, when you throw that word genocide around, you gotta watch it, because there's a lot of hypocrisy around that, because genocides have happened. Is genocide happening in Ukraine? Well, hard to say right now. Certainly war crimes have happened. But genocides have happened around the world in the last 10, 20 years. And we haven't done anything about it. The West hasn't done anything about it, really.
Genocide is also a very trendy word, isn't it?
Exactly. We always like to throw that one around.
Yeah, Canada especially.
Yeah. So there's a lot of hypocrisy. And that's why one of the reasons a lot of countries have been neutral or not condemned Russia's invasion of Ukraine is because they see there's so much hypocrisy in the West about intervention. And I mean, U.S. invaded Iraq for no reason. The invasion of Afghanistan may be justified in the beginning, but the Americans could have worked with the Taliban and made it had a better outcome, and they didn't, and they made all sorts of mistakes, and left that place a mess. There's been U.S. interventions in Latin America, whether it's in Caribbean, Grenada, Panama. So there's, and of course, all through the years, whether it's Chile or Guatemala, the U.S. has precipitated regime change. So there's a lot of reasons why a lot of countries haven't come to condemn Russia for the invasion of Ukraine, illegitimate and horrible and disgusting as it is. A lot of countries say, well, you know what, the world's a nasty place, and the West can't be that hypocritical because they've done all sorts of nasty stuff,
But isn't the kind of impetus or the ether of the American imperial force kind of like, in its purest form, more of like a good thing? You know what I mean? Like, I mean, it's liberal democracy.
No, absolutely. There's a whole idea of liberal democracy, which we really never had. I mean, Gandhi used to say that about Western civilization. Gandhi used to say, well, that's a great idea. It never happened. We don't really have a Western civilization because we have a history of bloodshed and interventionism, and and as we've talked about on this, the postings about, there's been a lot of books about a lot of books have come out about how the U.S. needs to withdraw from the world and withdraw its military footprint. And I think in some ways it was sort of slowly moving in that direction. But now the Americans are ramping up their military budget, which is already huge. I think it's going to be close to $1 trillion. That's incredible. It's obscene, given all the problems that the U.S. has. They have a military budget that's already bigger than every other country on the planet Earth. And now, because of Ukraine, they're ramping it up. And that's obscene. Just because the invasion of Ukraine happened, doesn't mean the Americans shouldn't withdraw somewhat its military footprint, because it should. It doesn't have to be all around the world. The world's a better place with a lesser American footprint, despite what's going on in Ukraine. These are complicated issues, but anyhow, I wanted a short video, so I want to so there's a lot of hypocrisy out there, and that's why a lot of countries in the world have not condemned Russia or come on the side of the West. I mean, come on. Last June, Israel was pounding Gaza, killing thousands of people in Gaza, or hundreds. I I don't want to stretch that out, but killing a lot of people in Gaza, and the world really didn't care. You didn't go to one of the grocery stores in Toronto and have people say, hey, do you want to give money to Gaza like they are with Ukraine? No, of course not, because, no one gives a damn about Arabs or Palestinians. The Ukrainians are white Christians, and people care about them. Yeah, and that's going back to my previous comments about things going on in Africa that no one cares about. It all depends, as Noam Chomsky used to say, it all depends whose ox is being gored. And Ukraine is seen as a European country. It's full of white Christians, so we care about them. I mean, look at the hypocrisy on refugees. Europeans didn't want any refugees from the Middle East or Afghanistan, but they'll take lots of Ukrainians in. So there's so much hypocrisy on this issue. And don't get me wrong, we should take Ukrainian refugees in, take them in, let's bring them to Canada, let's help them out, no question. I'm very sympathetic to Ukrainians.
But isn't it better for people who are fleeing, like, for whatever reason, fleeing their homeland for whatever reason, to settle regionally, whether they be black or white?
No question, absolutely. That's why they want to stay in Poland and other countries in the region, because they want to go back, and that's great. That's what should happen. I'm just trying to say is what, and to wrap this up, what Russia did is horrible and disgusting and atrocious. They invaded a country for no reason, just because there's a certain Putin has a sort of sense of Russian exceptionalism. You know what I mean? Russians, like the Americans, think that they're better. Russians, not too different than Americans, actually. You have American exceptionalism, you have Russian exceptionalism. The Russians, throughout their history, always thought they were different people. They were better than others. They were the inheritors of the Roman Empire and all this.
I mean, mind you, they do have a really robust culture, right?
They have an incredibly robust culture, full of literature and the arts. We all know that, right?
Well, they said St. Petersburg, for instance, can rival Paris.
Oh my God, I mean? The Hermitage and all the great Russian artists, and of course, the Russian ballet and all the great literary figures from Tolstoy to, you name it. They have an incredible literary history. But there is a sense of Russian exceptionalism, which has now been, in a sense, been defeated. And when this all ends, Russia will be a very defeated, demoralized place. As I said, it's a pariah state. It's basically a failed state. But there is a sense, and the Putin sort of exemplifies this, of they have this sort of, they're not too different than the Americans that way. Americans have this exceptionalism that they're better than everyone. The Russians have the same thing. So how this all plays out, as I said, it'll probably be a messy compromise in the end, but the war will end. But yeah, it's going to go on for a bit, and it's going to get nasty still, especially in the eastern Ukraine. And like I said, there's reasons a lot of countries in the world did not immediately condemn Russia, because they have a different view of it, and they're cynical of the West. And don't forget, the West only makes up 12% of the world's population. Okay, Western Europe, Canada, the U.S., which is considered the West. They don't make up,
but we have a lot of power, though.
We have a lot of power, a lot of economic power, military power. But we're only 12% of the world's population, whereas that leaves 88% of the world out there, and a good chunk of them don't see the Russian invasion of Ukraine as a big deal, and they need to trade with Russia. They're somewhat sympathetic to Russia, and yeah, it's complicated.
They all feel kind of left out by the U.S., right?
Yeah, exactly. The West is kind of an elite private club, okay, and is exemplified in the G7, and yes, they have lots of military and economic power, but like I said, and I'm going to wrap this up right now because I promised a shorter video than all our rambling ones. Putin made a mistake. He had already won back in the early winter. He'd gotten the West's attention. Re-examining the security architecture in Europe was a good idea, but he gambled that the West wouldn't care if he invaded Ukraine, because he wanted he's still, you know, he was, everyone's written about this. He was embarrassed by the collapse of the Soviet Union, and Ukraine is vital to Russian integrity and all that. He thought that Ukrainians would welcome him with open arms. They didn't. He gambled. He lost. He made a strategic error, and Russia is now a pariah state for a long time, a rogue state, and like I said earlier, it was a failing state, but now it's probably much a failed state. And what's going to happen eventually? I think the Russian people will eventually get tired of this, and Putin's future is definitely uncertain, and he kind of knows that. So to end this, no good outcome of this. And you know, they're talking about NATO, Finland and Sweden joining NATO. Maybe I should just pause that. Like, do we need to really escalate a situation that's already bad? Like, don't get me wrong, they have every right to do that. I know poke it in Putin's eyes, but maybe it's just, I think, you know, I think a little de-escalation. You know, keep sending out weapons to Ukraine. That's good. They'll keep up the good fight, and like I said, there'll be a messy compromise. This war will end with a messy compromise. But we're going to have to figure out how to deal with Russia. Putin's going to be around for a while. So, and totally isolating the place is probably not probably the wisest strategy. But yeah, they're going to be held to account for the crimes they committed, no question. And their punishment will be in being an international pariah state, a rogue state. Putin won't be able to go anywhere, and their economy will suffer for years and years to come. So that's pretty much it. There's probably more to say on this, but this is a fast-moving situation. That's why we haven't done a video in a couple of months. But I just wanted to point out the certain hypocrisies and some of the other things. And but I'll just, yeah, basically, it's not black and white, and what Putin has done in Ukraine is horrible and atrocious, and he will be held to account. The Russian military will be held to account, and people will be held accountable, and probably out of this won't be a Ukrainian victory, but a messy compromise. But we'll see. It'll all happen probably within the next month or two. This will grind on for a while, but it will happen. Okay, on that note, that's it. Good night from Willowdale here at Goulding Park in Willowdale.